So now let's start to talk about graphing. Now, when we're graphing, there's a few things that we want to be really careful about. One is picking allowed inputs, and two, picking inputs that make the calculations easy. So let's talk about what that means. First off, x is the input when something is written in functional form. So we're going to pick x values, and those x values will tell us what the corresponding y value is, and then we have a point, an x and a y. So first off, let's talk about, are there any x values we can't pick? And the question you kind of want to ask here is, are there any x values that will break this equation? Well, since this is a square root function, we know that whatever's under the square root will have to be positive. So I know that x minus 3 has to be greater than or equal to 0. If we put a negative in there, well, I mean, that's an imaginary number. We're not going to be able to graph it, and it's not something that we're interested in this case. So add 3 to both sides here, and we're going to wind up with x has to be greater than or equal to 3. So whatever values we pick, we have to pick values that are greater than or equal to 3. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a few values that I know work and I know are easy to calculate, and then we'll talk about why that's the case. All right, now I picked these values for a very specific reason. But again, we'll talk about what that reason is. Now, the 3 should be pretty easy to figure out, right? 3 is the smallest number we're allowed to pick. So let's go ahead and plug that into the equation. Now, if you notice here, when I plug in x, I put an x there. So now I'm going to plug in 3, so I'm going to put a 3 there. So now I have the point 3, 0 as one of my points. So let's go ahead and plot that. So now I have a starting point. Now the next number that I picked was 4. So let's do the same thing for both 4, and then since I already picked 7, we'll do it for 7 as well. So we have 2 new points. I have the point 4, 1. So let's plot that. And I have the point 7, 2. So let's go ahead and plot that. And now we can start to see this taking shape. And it's looking like something like that. And honestly, that's good enough for us to have a rough idea of what this function is, how it looks. Now, I want to go back and talk about why I picked the numbers that I did here. I picked 4, which might make sense. That comes right after 3, right? But why did I pick 7 next? Well, let's kind of look through here. I picked 7 and plugged it in, and then what did I get under that square root? Oh, I got a perfect square. I got a 4. Excellent. That means that when I square root it, I'm not going to have to deal with some funky, long, irrational number. Now, I want you to pause it for a second and think, what is the best number to pick next to get an easy calculation? All right, so I'm hoping that you were able to figure out that the best next input is probably going to be 12. Now let's talk about why that's the case. I find it easiest here to say, well, I want a perfect square at this point. Notice my work's nice and organized, so it's easy for me to find that entry point. Well, what's the next perfect square? It is a 9, which will end up giving me a 3. So I know my point's going to be 12, 3. Okay, but let's work backwards. If that's the case, I know I have to use this relationship here. So what number can I plug in that'll give me a 9 under that square root? Well, I need a 12 because 12 minus 3 is 9. Again, I have that point 12, 3. And as you can see, my graph might not be perfect, but if I came out a couple more units here, you can see it's climbing and it would probably look a little more like that. Okay, but a graph is never going to be super accurate. It's meant to be a sketch. If we want something real accurate, we use a computer. What I'm getting at here, though, is that if we ever aren't sure how to graph a function, we can just plot some points. However, we need to be conscious of the fact that there are certain points that are allowed, and there are certain points that are going to make the calculation a lot easier.